this week's episode of Level Up Cyber Live. My name is Tony Bryan, Executive Director of CyberUp, and your host for the show. To say that I'm excited about today's conversation may be an understatement. Steve and I were just getting ready for this show and kind of dove into a few of the topics, and a lot of really great insights that I know were new for me. And so I'm very excited to share those with everybody else. So with that, I'd like to welcome Steve Zalewski. Steve is a former CISO at Levi Strauss, cool company, right? Everybody loves jeans, and is now an investor and supporter partner in the cybersecurity community and many different facets across the community. So Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tony. Really excited to be here today. Looking forward to the conversation.
I've had the pleasure to get to know you a little bit. I'd love for you just to tell everybody a little bit about your story and how you got to where you're at today.
Sure. So I've been in cybersecurity probably about 23, 24 years. It was not my first career. So I spent the first half of my career building product, right? I'm a software engineer by trade and built enterprise products for 20 years. Enterprise operating systems, data security, data protection, fiber channel hubs and switches, patents, all that kind of stuff. And about 23, 24 years ago, when it went from that side to the practitioner side, the buyer side, okay? And so I literally left the R&D startup world and said, let me go join Kaiser Permanente, which for many of you is a very large health maintenance organization. And I said, I'm just going to go into IT and I'm going to go manage, right, a component of IT. My kids are young. I want to be able to have work-life balance. Let me go do that. And did that for about a year and then just realized, oh my goodness gracious, I am not a fit, okay? But as part of that transition while I was there, one of the teams I picked up was identity and access management. And that was a better fit for me, early stage doing development, architecture. And then I came in on a Monday and found out I was now in cybersecurity because they had hired their first CISO. And he scanned through the organization, found all the security folks, and we were now in cybersecurity. That is how I got into cybersecurity, just like that. Come in Monday morning, ta-da. And then obviously I went on that path for a few more years. Then I joined Pacific Gas and Electric as a very large gas and electric utility as an enterprise architect, put down a large identity and access management program there. Then was promoted up to a managing enterprise architect, had a team, did a lot of the critical infrastructure protection for the gas and electric side, which is really exciting. Did that for 6 years. And then I joined Levi Strauss and just tried something new again, which was, retail. And I tell people it is women selling jeans to women, and was there for 6 years, chief security architect, deputy CISO. And I would say my tagline and what people know me for from Levi Strauss is my aha moment of realizing it's not about security, it's about selling more jeans. But that is all my executive team cared about. And so my tagline would be for security vendors or others that came in to try to sell me something. And I would simply say, if you can explain to me how this sells more jeans, then we can have a conversation, because that's the only thing my executive team cares about. And I go, so that was my journey. And then I retired a couple of years ago from that role and decided to start an advisory practice where I spend a lot of time with the security startups now representing the CISO community and trying to get them to understand what it's like to be a CISO and to stop trying to help me find a problem, but own a problem. Okay. And to stop trying to sell me sneakers and realize this is a war and you're selling me weapons, and you have to understand how well those things work. And so that transition was, for me, kind of a re-engagement, because being an operating CISO is exhausting. It is a burnout exercise. And now here I am on this show and talking to all of you about what the ecosystem looks like and kind of wanting to be that connector of brutal truth, where I'm not placing blame on anybody, but I'm there to be able to say, look, we have a common enemy, okay? But we have all got to do a better job from a security village perspective of protecting our children, which are our businesses. And to the degree that we stop fighting with each other over who's better and keep our focus on the common enemy and build the security profession correctly, I think we're on the right path.
You and I, before we hopped on, had a really interesting discussion around the timeline in which, because I think it's easy to forget, right? Like this sector, cyber is pretty young. In the grand scheme of life, it is a very young industry where we're still figuring things out. And I think large and far, there's a lot of people, to your point of this idea of who's better, this weirdly competitive nature when, and I'm not going to say it because I hate when people say it's a team sport. Yes, I get it. But at the same time, I'd love to have you run everybody through kind of your 25 or so year history, right? To where we were I don't know, it was an eye opener to me, and it puts it in perspective of just, I think we're all expecting Ferraris and Lamborghinis right now of like where teams should be. And the reality is we're good kind of staple Ford Explorers. It's a good car, it's dependable, but we're not going fast, right? We've got the basics down and we've got a little bit of accoutrements, but there's a lot of room for growth. So I'll stop rambling about that. And would you mind running everybody through kind of that analogy from your timeline of just how immature in age, not obviously what we do for cyber?
Yeah, sure, Tony. So when we were talking, I positioned it this way. You say, look, CISO roles maybe 25 years old. Cybersecurity maybe 50 years old, right? Multics in the old days of where initial cybersecurity came in. 25 years ago, the CISO. So it feels like we've been around a while. But I go, look at the American Bar Association. Look at lawyers. Look at how long they've been around and how the practice of law from thousands of years ago is matured, right? And how it fits into our civilization. They go, so if you look at cybersecurity as a concept, maybe 50 years, cryptography aside, but 50 years, okay, if you think of us as a child, we're like a 5 or a 6-year-old, okay? And the business are the parents, okay? And they're first-time parents. So we're 6 years old. We've made phenomenal progress if you think about a child from being a day old to being 6 years old. But we got a ways to go to even get to our teenage years. We got another 25 years minimum, okay, to be able to take cybersecurity as a concept and as a set of tool jockeys and to establish a true profession of understanding what cybersecurity is, similar to the legal profession or the medical profession, okay? So you got to look at it that way. And so you've got all the businesses, right, who are trying to raise the cybersecurity child, invest in it. They've never done this before. They're trying to figure it out. The child itself is getting better and bigger and smarter and faster, but we don't know what the teenage years are going to look like, never mind the adult. And so what we're all trying to figure out, okay, is how we go on that journey, yet we're all treating it as if it was a mature individual already. Okay. And that's just kind of the dichotomy that we're in, where I simply say, look, we can only expect so much out of everybody to do this. And we got to realize where we are in the larger journey of the maturation of the profession and embrace that. Okay. And realize now, if you apply that type of a lens, look at some of the inflection points, look at some of the maturity levels that are occurring, right, at these stages where what a CISO was 5 years ago, and all of a sudden the transitions to one of tool jockeys to risk management, from one of secure the company to sell more jeans, okay, to one of security to prevent a breach at all cost versus security as a cost center to do business. And I need to take certain insurance policies against key risks, but it's one more business risk to me now. It's not this ethereal concept of security, fear, uncertainty, doubt. We're all going to be out of business because people are hacking us. Okay. That's part of the maturity. We just realized, no, wait a minute, the child is going to trip and fall and get hurt, but they are going to walk, right? They are going to run. They are going to touch a stove. Sometime it'll be hot, in which case we have to go to the hospital, but we can't prevent these things. What we have to do is learn and mature through them. And that, in my mind, is a better reflection of where we are from a cybersecurity profession, and why a lot of these conversations that we're having, taken, independently, just kind of from a perspective of that problem, when looked at the larger ecosystem, you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, right? And where we went, for example, is, where's the 1 million security jobs in the vocations? Okay. And some of the challenge here is, look, security is not a 4-year degree. It used to be, it can be, but where's the vocational tracks? And where's an appreciation that, we need a certain number of mechanics and plumbers and electricians in cybersecurity as analysts or PMOs or some functions, but there's a limited capacity to bring that in conjunction with the overall maturity of the cybersecurity profession to create the environment for those jobs. That just the fact that we wish those jobs, or that we can grow exponentially now in the way that we do cybersecurity, is not going to match the way we're going to be practicing cybersecurity 10 or 15 years from now. The people, process, and technologies are just too dynamic. And the way we do things today will look nothing like we do them 10 or 15 years ago as a security organization protecting our companies.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I want to kind of dive into some of the CISO stuff you alluded to, because that role, along with the industry as a whole, has evolved quite a bit, right? There's greater scrutiny from SEC and requirements for board members. There's board training. We've added, more robust insurance products, but it's still a job that comes with a lot of stress. You alluded to that idea, or you mentioned the burnout that comes along with it. And oftentimes a thankless job that, in fact, is probably a bigger risk to take it if something bad happens, because there's really little backside protection for that individual at the end of the day. So, how, as you're sitting as a CISO in residence, and, with the Professional Association of CISOs, which is a great organization, by the way, because I think it is, there's a lot of supports, I think, for CISOs. Now, obviously everybody's well compensated, but of course money is one thing, but like mental health and sanity and like job satisfaction is equally as important. And no matter how much money you make, that's not going to matter. So I'd like to unpack that, right? How have you seen the role of the CISO evolve over the last couple of years, and where do you see it going into the future? And what are some ways in which, CISOs can work better with boards, their other executive leaders, or how does that need to go?
Yeah. I'm not going to have a simple answer here, but here's the analogy as I've thought about this with you. You go, my observation is people in cybersecurity, not just CISOs. We'll start with CISOs, or we'll just call CISOs, meaning anybody in the profession of cybersecurity at the management or senior executive level. Okay. My observation is many of those people in a different life would have been a firefighter or a policeman, okay, or a nurse or a paramedic. Because what you find is there's something just innate in our need to run to the fire. Okay, we understand that there's a protective nature to our job to protect the business and protect the people, and we're driven to do that. So we will run to the fire to put it out. Okay, and that's not a bad place to be, as cybersecurity was young. But when I think about it now, especially in the last 3-4 years, it used to be that we had a bullseye on our chest, right? The bad guys would attack us, okay? They would damage our company. We as firefighters would come streaming in, do our incident response, have our SOC teams, put the company back together, trying to prevent the attacks. When they don't, put the fire out, okay? And the executive teams respected that job. That was what it was understood to be. The executives understood it. And so when we took the bullet or the arrow in the chest, the executive teams had our back. Okay. Did a good job, Steve, man. 48 hours, 72 hours with your teams, heroic efforts. Thank you. Okay. But that's changed. And the way I describe that is, if you look at what a firefighter truly is, I mean, if you look at the role of a firefighter, when a firefighter rolls up to the house now, Is their job to put out the fire first? And the answer is no, right? When they roll in, their job is to determine if there are any people or animals in that building and to get those humans or animals out first, okay? And then you put the fire out. And the analogy there now is, so when I roll up and a company has been attacked, my job is not to try to put the fire out and save the entire company. My job is to save those parts of the company that are critical to the company's continued survival. And you protect those and you make sure that those people are safe and secure. And then you worry about the collateral damage to the house or the rest of the company. And then you put it back together as best you can. Okay. And so our role is changed, like the firefighter role, which is it's not to protect the entire company equally. It's to understand the insurance policies we have to take for the key business processes that are our company, okay, at the expense of others, because I just cannot provide a uniform defense no matter how much money I have. So that's the shift of we're truly becoming firefighters in the truest sense now, which means who has our back? Because the executive teams are still working through that as well, right? Because we're still presenting as we're going to put the fire out and protect the whole company. And when we don't, the executive teams are saying you didn't do your job. Thank you. There's the door. Or we burn out because we're trying to be heroic all the time. And it is just beyond the ability of a human to do that. And so therefore, how do I reset the expectations of the role similar to firefighters now, where I actually have a chance at being successful at my role and actually have a work-life balance, so to speak? Well, that is part of we're 8 years old now, and we're having to have conversation with the adults around wanting a different perspective of how we grow forward, right? That's where we are in the industry. That's part of this. And so now as a CISO, I take the arrows from the bad guys and who's got my back, okay? Because I have to renegotiate what the expectations of a CISO in a cybersecurity organization are now against the realities of the business risk, knowing that what I committed to 5 years ago is I'm just going to prevent the attacks in my company is just not a sustainable or reasonable approach. We've demonstrated, except for limited cases, when you get to many companies, it's just not possible. And one of the reasons why I argue is because humans are the weakest link, right? Humans make mistakes. Humans are lazy. And so all the process in the world won't help me. All the technology in the world won't help me if the humans aren't willing to do their part. Okay. And even then, it's not that they don't want to, but it's 2 a.m, right? And you're not thinking and you're traveling and you click on a link and you fall for a fish. So resiliency, okay, the ability to withstand the attacks, not by keeping the whole house from ever catching fire, by putting fire alarms in, by putting smoke detectors in, by putting automated sprinklers in, to realize that I've had to do all those steps because a fire will happen. And so let me manage that collateral damage and be resilient to move forward. That's part of the maturity change. That's what you're seeing in the industry, right? Because we're young, but it is very chaotic as we're working through this. And again, because for the last 10 or 15 years, the way we've practiced cybersecurity is clearly not sufficient for the next 15 years. Now that the business has realized we can't carry the cost against the effectiveness that you've provided to stop the attack. Okay. And efficiency isn't good enough anymore. You got to be effective. And so that's the transition in the CISO role. That's why I use the firefighter analogy. Okay. And the goal here when I talk to folks is to be able to say, look, I have this conversation about being a CISO, and many people say, that is the worst job I will never want. Let's keep it that way. Okay. To one of, this can be the most satisfying career that you can possibly have. I mean, it is just so hard, and it is, again, so right, because you're protecting the social fabric, right? You're protecting companies, but it has to come with conditions now. You have to understand that you don't get a get out of jail free card, that you, like every other business executive, have to negotiate the terms of success for an industry that is early in the maturation stages, and you need to be able to adapt.
Helpful perspective, because it's easy to want to go fast, right? Like we've got the answers, and we're told oftentimes, but things we either want to buy or we're sold to, that it can solve all of our problems. And it's nice to hear that, of course, we don't have all of the problems figured out, because we don't know what all the problems are, because the bad guys at this point don't even know what the problems are, because they're still making them up as we go. So I know for me, the legislature and the mandates from SEC and putting the focus on for executives and board members, that's such an important part, that it is back to being the team sport. It doesn't fall on a single person as a point of, I always think of Jenga, right? That the CISO is the one Jenga board that pulls out, that it all falls, right? And like, that's not necessarily the case. There's a slew of people, to your point, that should prop them up, and expectations and things there to be able to go. As we look ahead to the next 5 to 10 years, right? Hiring has been a big part of this discussion across the board. And, you know, you and I, we spent quite a bit of time kind of talking around where's the challenge, where's the rubber hit the road in this entry-level hiring conundrum I think we found in, right? We've painted a picture of millions of jobs. You alluded to earlier. We've created degree programs and boot camps and apprenticeship programs, ours included, in droves to solve this talent gap, skills gap. I don't know. We've had a lot of adjectives to describe what we've had, right, over the last 10 years. We haven't got any better. Let's be honest, right? CyberUp has had good success in doing apprenticeship. We want to do it at scale. And there's a lot of good examples of people doing good work, but I haven't seen much of it scale to the size in which I think we all expected the scale to be. Why is that? That's a big question, but what causes that, and what are some solutions we can do to try to maybe rectify that in the future?
Yeah. So it's a combination of unrealistic expectations and unintended consequences. Okay. So unrealistic expectations, right? Like I said, we're all firefighters. We want to help. We want to put people to work, right? Cybersecurity as an emerging profession, just, even 5 years ago, was unbounded, right? Budgets were increasing 20, 30% a year. Teams were increasing. The news is talking about all the cyber attacks coming out of North Korea or Russia, or, you pick your favorite nation state. And so therefore there seemed to be this unbounded need that we're going to need so many millions of analysts to be able to do the protection, right? And training and all the other facets, because there's so many companies, and every company is going to need a security team. Okay. That was the unbridled enthusiasm, okay, for what it was. There's 1 million jobs. But the reality, okay, is that didn't happen in 5 years. 5 years later, budgets got large for a lot of the Fortune 500s. Other companies were putting security teams in. But then the recessions started to hit. The security industry itself, right, has been so overspent that the business executives are saying, I can't afford, okay, the cost of security at its current trend. It just doesn't scale. And so therefore, there's some course correcting going on, okay, which results in, hey, guess what? Those initial projections were based on some unrealistic expectations and economic models that now that they're coming home to roost, okay, everybody politically still wants the 1 million jobs. Everybody says they must be there because, look, you told me 5 years ago they were. What's changed? Well, what's changed is what we're talking about here. That isn't so politically acceptable. Okay. And now what we're seeing is we don't necessarily need as many analysts because the process and the technology, right, are replacing a lot of the work that we were doing with analysts 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 years ago, right? We need more efficiency for effectiveness. And so therefore there's this moderating effect going on that said, oh, based on the projection for how budgets are going, everybody's going to be hiring. So of course I want to be able to bring in, okay, younger people, and I don't mean young people, but I mean people early into cybersecurity, into these roles that I can anticipate creating. But when the budgets didn't materialize, or now they're actually going the other way, okay, that market's frozen. And what we were talking about is, and so we're being creative in finding other ways to be able to bring cybersecurity resources within a company, right? Because we can't necessarily bring them in from the outside. And the other part of that we talked about too, which was most people think about cybersecurity as I want to hack. And so therefore I need a 4-year degree. I got to be good at hacking tools. I want to break things. Okay. Well, the security organizations, when you look at them, okay, are maturing. And I need product management. I need some engineering. I need operations. I need help desks. I need analysts. I need purple teams. So the 12 or 15 people that I have are spread pretty thin, okay, to cover the basics. Where do I find the headroom, okay, to be able to bring in another 4-year degree? We have to acknowledge there's a vocational component here, okay, that we have to think of cybersecurity as having a set of vocational jobs as well that only need a year or 18 months of expertise, but there's not as many of them because, again, right, I can only use so many analysts. I can only use so many young PMOs. I just don't have the room to carry people that are just bright and then bring them into the organization. The large companies do that and still do, but it hasn't materialized to the larger ecosystem because a lot of companies can't carry the size of those cybersecurity teams. It's just not economically viable right now. So that's the rationalization, which if you look at each of those pieces makes perfect sense. In aggregate, can somewhat explain why the million isn't even 500,000, okay? But it will evolve over time because some of the larger economics in the market and the maturity of cybersecurity and the way we accomplish cybersecurity is going through foundational change.
I like it. We mentioned a little bit earlier around just the idea of the entry level, right, is hard. And, a lot of it is being carried, to your point, by large companies with a little bit bigger budget. But when you start hitting some of these smaller startup companies that have 3 or 4, they need all 3 or 4 to be rock stars, right? Because there's very little margin. And I think you said it in the pre, right? If I'm a team of 10 and I bring in 1 entry level, I've just cut my efficacy or my productivity by 10%, right, for that person. So how, with that in mind, and for those that listen are in the market for a job, it's okay. Don't panic. We're good, right? The jobs are there. It's just we have to get a little differently with it, right? It's just there's some different creativity. However, what's the counter to that, right? How do companies lean into some of the already existing people that have made this investment? Are there ways in which we can create more roles or periphery roles, or where should these folks that have maybe are finding themselves out of work or a little bit of frustration, like where can they go to really find ways to break into it, or where should they be looking?
Yeah, I would say from that perspective, the cybersecurity industry is no different than any industry. Right? If you come out and you're passionate about marketing, right? Or you're passionate about fashion, okay? Or you're passionate about accounting, okay? All those fields have openings as well, right? But they're somewhat saturated too. And what's the answer? The answer is you network, okay? You demonstrate interest, you find ways to get yourself introduced in, okay, to demonstrate your worth. It's hard work. Okay, it is, but that's what you do, right? And then you get results from that. Putting a resume in those days, just the economy isn't there for that. So you, along with 50 others, you have to differentiate. So what I say is, look, the good news is if you want to get into cybersecurity is a family. Okay. We really act like a family. There's not that many of us, and there's more, but we really work with each other. That firefighter mentality of trying to help each other out, we want to help. That's not necessarily true in the other industries. Okay. So you got to put yourself out there a little bit. Okay. If there's local security communities and chapters, okay, use them. They'll be happy to embrace you. Doesn't mean you have to pay. Come along. Okay. There's all kinds of courses on AWS and others and certifications that allow you, without having to pay a lot of money, to educate yourself. Okay. Just like mechanics, some are just natural. They can look at an engine and you give them tools and they take it apart. It's no different in cybersecurity, right? If you have a natural inkling as an analyst, right, or as a hacker, okay, or as somebody who just likes to manage projects, okay, you have this natural innate abilities. Take the courses, right, to be able to demonstrate your interest, and then you got to fight for the job because there just aren't as many as we would like. That's just the natural reality, right, of what we have to do. So embrace it, okay, go for it, and it will pay off. Maybe not as quick as you want, maybe not in the ideal job that you want, but that very same kind of creativity that made the United States, where we just won't say no, we find a way. It doesn't mean that it's going to be comfortable, but you do it. The cybersecurity industry is the same, and to a certain extent, you know what I mean. When you get into it, you will find a role, okay, and you will succeed. But you got to put the time and effort in to do the research to know in an emerging kind of field like this. It's not that we just need 10,000 people. You do kind of have to do some homework to know where you fit in there to be able to make the case. And then put yourself out there and good things will happen.
I almost think that's a perfect summary. The last question is what advice would you give to level up your career? You just answered it, nailed it right there with that answer. So, man, I think we could probably go on for probably another 30 minutes because I've got some barn burning questions here around CISO stuff. And it's exciting, right? And it's easy to forget that we are a young sector with a lot of unknowns, and I don't think there are many industries or sectors that have international threat actors and state actors that are coming at them, right? So, like, to your point, I think you said it earlier in this, and even when we got on, like, there's a level of horror and seriousness to this, right? Like, real world things happen and implications happen. It's not a stub toe or a splinter. This is data and money lost and jobs lost and other things. So it's easy to get caught up and forget that, right? And just in how serious this stuff is. And then there's a couple, at least for me, that in the back of my mind, that I worry about more, and probably put on my military hat to some of that extent of like, okay, like there's risks that come along with this. So we get focused on so many other things and forget the big picture oftentimes. So I appreciate the grounding and the reminder of that today in a good way, right? In a good way. So Steve, man, thank you so much for the time on the show. I'm really thankful to get to know you, and I might call you back up for another show. I like the segment of Ask a CISO, if I'm being honest. I think it's so many. We've interacted with thousands of people over the last 10 years of just trying to find their place and way into this sector. And so, I'm proud of the work that CyberUp has done to make that inclusive and to make more opportunities for non-traditional students to get into it. I want to do it more because it's my favorite thing in the world to do, right? Is to have somebody call us and say, I've got my job and I'm good and my family's taken care of. Like, that's amazing. So you give me hope that there's room there for us to see this over the next 5 to 10 years and that we hit the level of maturity that we're doing the things we need to do. So long ramble, but as a long way to say thank you, Steve, for your time. Thank you for everybody for listening, and everybody have a great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, Steve.